Good morning. Thanks for being here. So this question about who are the major players in the process of political Islam in the post-Arab Spring world. Now, most of the people you're going to be hearing from today, the others have been talking in terms of groups and institutions. Well, I'm actually a psychologist, so it might not surprise you that I'm going to be talking more about the forces as they move within an individual, the tensions that individuals feel. I'm going to try to answer the question, well, what happened in Egypt and in Tunisia, but especially Egypt? I mean, initially we saw these demonstrations that made us think, oh, there we go. There's Jeffersonian democracy breaking out in the Middle East, and but then there were the results of the parliamentary election. We saw the ascendance of Islamism, Islamist parties, enough so you could wonder, wow, is Egypt on its way to becoming like Iran or something like that? Or others going to follow in their wake? And the answer I'm going to offer is that there is within most Muslims, and in the Middle East, of course, a kind of inner clash of civilizations. There is an attraction to liberal democratic values and our Islamist aspirations. And the key thing that we need to remember is that neither of these are going to go away. Both of them are going to be present. Both of them are strong forces within the majority of Muslims. This is based on polls that have been done before and after the Arab Spring, and it's also based on focus groups that I've done throughout the region. Let me just give you a few examples of the kinds of numbers you see in polls on these questions. On whether a democratic political system is a good way of governing our own country. 83% of Egyptians say it is, 90% of Moroccans, 88% of Kuwaitis, 81% of Jordanians, 85% of Palestinians, 76% of Iraqis. Democracy may have its problems, but it is better than any other form of government. Again, large majorities in Egypt, Jordan, Algeria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco. And here's one that I think is, in a way, particularly interesting. The statement, the will of the people should be the basis of the authority of government. You get large numbers of Muslims agreeing with that, including 98% of Egyptians, as well as 67% of Iranians. So, and what's particularly interesting about that is that goes against, it's kind of somewhat contrary to the principle that Islam or Sharia should be the basis of the authority of government. And you get majorities agreeing with that in Jordan as well. Pew asked a question where they sort of put up in front of the respondent the argument that democracy is a Western way of doing things that would not work here, versus democracy is not just for the West and can work well here. And large majorities rejected the view that this is simply a Western way of doing things and that democracy can work here, including Kuwait, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestinians, Egyptians, Moroccans, and so on. You also find that throughout the Middle East, there's very strong support for liberal principles related to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on. This whole Jeffersonian image is starting to solidify. Yes, they're just on their way to becoming all like European countries. And then there are a whole set of poll questions that show strong support for Islamist principles. That Islam should play a central role in government is endorsed by 92% of Egyptians. 85% of Egyptians say that it should be the official religion of their country. And even when you present them the counter-argument that our government should not make Islam the official religion because this would be unfair to citizens of Egypt who are not Muslim, 57% of Egyptians say no, it should be the official religion. Now, then there's the question of Sharia. We presented, we said, here are a number of goals of Al-Qaeda. How do you feel about those goals? So it's framed in this, Al-Qaeda is not popular, but if you say, but here's some goals, and one of them is to require a strict application of Sharia law in every country. Well, 71% of Egyptians and 76% of Moroccans endorsed that goal. 57% of Egyptians said that Sharia should play a larger role than it does today in Egypt. Now, there was even one poll that Arab Barometer did where they gave two statements. One, the government should implement only the laws of Sharia. Majorities agreed. Large majorities, 86% in Morocco, 80% in Jordan, 80% in Algeria, 77% in Kuwait, 55% of the Palestinians. And then in the same poll, the government and parliament should make laws according to the wishes of the people. And 82% in Morocco agreed, 62% in Kuwait, 59% in Algeria, Jordan, and the Palestinians, and so on. So clearly there is some tension here. Another example is around the issue of vetting laws. That Peter mentioned, an idea that the Muslim Brotherhood has put forward, that there should be a council of religious scholars who have the power to overturn laws that it believes are contrary to the Quran. The Muslim Brotherhood put this forward, but then even before the Arab Spring backed away from it, but it's still kind of there in the background. So presented the argument that there should be a body of senior religious scholars that has the power to overturn laws when it believes they are contrary to the Quran, as opposed to the liberal position that if laws are passed by democratically elected officials and are consistent with the Constitution, that they should not be subject to a veto by religious scholars. Majorities endorsed the Islamist position in favor of this vetting, 75% in Egypt, 63% in Iraq, 62% in Iran, 59% of Palestinians. But at the same time, when World Values presented the statement that men of religion should have no influence over the decisions of government, you got majorities agreeing with that in Morocco, the Palestinians, as well as a plurality in Algeria. But majorities did disagree in Kuwait, and views were divided in Jordan. You also see in the statement, religion is a matter of personal faith and should be kept separate from government policy. Does get majority agreement in Lebanon, Turkey, Kuwait, Morocco. But in Jordan, a slight majority disagree, and Egyptians are divided. So what you see here are real tensions. Obviously, substantial numbers of people are agreeing with both liberal positions and Islamist positions. It's an internal tension. It's an internal conflict. And there is a rejection, basically, of Al-Qaeda and its view of a pure Islamist model. That is not popular. At the same time, Muslims do want to preserve the kind of Islamic foundations of their society. They believe that Islam has served them well. It is a source of pride. It is their most fundamental identity, more fundamental than their national identity. And they want Sharia to play a role. They want a kind of quality of piety in their culture. And this is the idea that this is going to go away. See, the liberal model is not that the religion should play no role, but that religion should be a private experience. While the Islamic model is that it should be part of the public sphere. And most Muslims endorsed that idea, that Islam should play some role in the public sphere. Now, I need to mention that there's one other force operating in the Middle East that we need to track to some extent, which is that there is still some attraction to authoritarianism. Asked if they would opt for a democratic form of government or would rather rely on a leader with a strong hand. Now, most say that they favor a democratic form of government, 65% Kuwait, 52% in Jordan, not that many, right? But a majority of Palestinians favored a strong leader, and Egyptians were divided. This is before the Arab Spring. So you need to keep in mind that there is some attraction to the authoritarian system. It is one other factor, particularly when things get kind of unstable. All right, so how is all this playing out in the present environment? Well, first of all, the Arab Spring as a phenomenon is generally endorsed. It's seen as a positive thing. The Arab Center for Research in Politics polled 12 Arab countries, and overall 70% said they supported the revolutions. And 2/3 said that they support democracy and reject the position that based on the attraction of stability and security. In Egypt, Gallup did some polling in the fall and found quite positive attitudes. 79% said that this has improved Egypt's status in the world with Mubarak resigning. They reject the idea that it's due to the foreign influences. And interestingly, too, majorities support the protesters against Assad in Syria. They're eager they were expressing eagerness for the elections to move forward, 87%, and 89% believe that parliamentary elections would be fair. So you get, that sounds pretty upbeat, pretty optimistic. But at the same time, more modest numbers say that their own situation has improved as a result of the Arab Spring. 47% said that it has improved, 16% that it's gotten worse in Egypt, 35% no impact. But in Morocco, Saudi Arabia, UAE, you do have these almost half in every case saying that it has improved. Jordan, not so. Only 18% say that the Arab Spring has improved things for them. 25% and say it's made it worse. 58% say no impact. And the Lebanese are divided on the question as well. When you look at how Egyptians are feeling about the future, there's a lot of optimism, really quite interesting. Asked whether they're going to be better off in 5 years. 85% of Egyptians expressed this optimism. And in 2009, when the same question was asked, only 39% expressed optimism. So that's a really significant change. Things are up also significantly in Morocco with substantial optimism, also Saudi Arabia, and all these are movements. All these are changes. So there's a kind of upbeat movement, but not in Jordan and not in Lebanon. In fact, things are kind of downturned in Jordan. Liberal forces, democracy, all that's very strong, and it actually has solidified. There's been a movement away from this argument in favor of a strong hand in Egypt and Jordan, and support for freedom of expression and so on is very, very high. At the same time, you still see the support for Islamist forces. Asked whether laws should strictly follow the Quran, 62% in Egypt, 70% in Jordan, 36% in Lebanon. And, of course, you see this huge increase in the support for the Muslim Brotherhood. And that went through this very sharp upward movement. Just in August, it was only 17%, while in December it was 48%. The poll said that they supported it, and this upward movement with the Noor party. So you see this both of these forces operating, which brings me around to this key point that Peter was alluding to, which is that the Muslim Brotherhood and Ennahda in Tunisia have basically taken a new space, which is that they are presenting themselves as basically being the middle ground. We tend to look at them as being, the Islamists, the Salafists, and the Muslim Brotherhood together are this sort of unitary actor. But I don't think that is how most Egyptians see it. And the Ennahda party is working really hard, well, both of them are working very hard to not be associated with that. Ennahda has actually come out and said, we don't have to have it in the Constitution that Sharia is the basis of law, which is a rather radical shift for them to make. So you have this effort on their part to create this kind of middle ground, and I think that they're playing their hand quite well. They've got the Salafists on their right that they are now distinguishing themselves from, but they're making many affirmations of liberal principle. They also have tried up till recently to have these good relations with the military to create this sense of continuity. The military continues to be popular. There's confidence in the military. It might surprise you, some of these numbers. In Egypt, there is confidence that the military will hand over power. So there's the Muslim Brotherhood has played well in that, but that is kind of fraying now, and it's hard to say where it's going to go as the military seems to be resisting letting go of control, and how the Muslim Brotherhood is going to maneuver between the Salafists and the secularists. It's a real question, too, how is the Muslim Brotherhood going to raise again this idea of having a body of religious scholars to review the laws. Now, I want to say just a few minutes on in closing about relations to the U.S. and views of the U.S. in the Middle East continue to be quite negative. After Obama was elected, all around the world, views of the U.S. improved dramatically, but not in the Middle East, not in Pakistan. And very large majorities have unfavorable views of the U.S. there now. The exception is Lebanon. And the perception is that relations with the West are bad. And there's also a perception that the government cooperates too much with the U.S., in plurality in Egypt, a majority in Jordan, majority in Lebanon. The U.S. is basically seen, in terms of the Arab Spring, the U.S. is seen as being behind the curve. They just tried to get out in front of the parade once it was inevitable. 73% in Egypt say that the U.S. is not serious about promoting democracy in the region. 71% oppose economic aid from the U.S. And this whole issue with the civil society groups, 74% oppose U.S. aid to Egyptian civil society groups. So this whole move to go after the IRI and NDI, they were playing to the crowd in this. This is not something they were doing despite the crowd. So let me just say briefly, put what is going on now in the context of views about the United States. Views of the United States, which is what I talk about in my book, is driven by what I call this narrative of betrayal. There is this attraction to much about that's associated with the U.S. democracy, human rights, and so on, international law. And then there's a perception, religious tolerance is another key one. And so there is this, it's a complex feeling. It's not as simple as that people in the Middle East have a negative feeling. They are drawn to a lot about America. And then there's a perception that the U.S. doesn't abide by those principles, and that the U.S. is fundamentally driven by hostility toward Islam. Now that can sound crazy to us, but this is widely believed. There is a real perception that the U.S. is determined to break down Islam. Oh, yeah, okay, it's fine for people to go to the mosque when they want to. But the idea is that Islam would be in the public sphere is perceived as something the U.S. is hostile to and trying to break down through promoting liberalism. And then, and the presence of U.S. military forces in the region is seen as part of this effort. Part of there is a perception that the U.S. is using military force. It has a kind of gun to the head of the Muslim world and is saying, back off of Islam, accept our secular model of how society should be organized. So, when the United States is perceived as in any way trying to intervene and impact anything going on in their society, they're quite suspicious of it, and it has this effect that's contrary to whatever the U.S. is trying to do. So if the U.S. is perceived as trying to promote secular principles, this creates a reaction of, to hold on to my Islamic identity, I need to dig my heels in deeper. I need to identify more deeply with Islam because there is this threat. And this just gets generalized to all kinds of things, to cultural products, to television, which they are drawn to, and then they feel, wait a minute, I'm being polluted by these forces. So there's this. The intensity of feeling toward the U.S. is hard to comprehend. The perception that the U.S. is so pervasive in their life, that it is affecting them in so many ways, is hard for us to understand. We know this term, the great Satan, like a cosmic force. I just thought that was just an epithet. Well, in fact, it describes something that they experience as the U.S. as being so powerful. It's very much associated, though, at the same time with the changes that come with globalization and the modernity, many of which they are drawn to, but they also don't want to be overwhelmed by it. So you see this kind of love-hate relationship, attraction, fear, want to move toward it, afraid it's going to overwhelm you, but you still don't want to actually abandon it. This feeling that, those principles that are guiding it are great, but then it lets us down, and that's the feeling of being betrayed, which is the title of my book. And then this persistent voice that comes through in the focus groups and so on, can't you make them see? I mean, it's like whenever I was leading focus groups, there would always be this sort of beseeching tone. Can I go back to Washington and get people to remember their higher values that they so much respect? Just one last comment. What can the U.S. do? Well, I'm not going to obviously be able to take on that broad question, though I do address it in the book. But the key thing is that the U.S. needs to embrace the idea that Islam is going to be part of these societies, and needs to take a friendlier posture toward moderate Islamist parties, make a distinction between Islamist parties that are willing to work democratically and those radical Islamists who are actually trying to use force in those goals. The idea that the U.S. is going to pick a winner. See, if the society was broken into groups, and that's what was going on, it's primarily a bunch of ball bearings. People are strongly secular and people who are strongly Islamist. You could say, okay, well, let's aid the people who are secularists, and then they'll get stronger, and then they'll get the uncertain ones. Well, but if the division is within a person, as we can see by having these large majorities expressing these seemingly contradictory positions, then anything you do to promote one side produces a reaction on the other side within the person, right? So they polarize. It creates a polarizing reaction. So any effort on the part of the United States to pick a winner in this situation and to promote it, that winner is going to backfire. And it's so hard for America to not act upon things, right? But that is the sort of a Zen principle here about non-action. Any departure from liberal principles is very costly because it leads to that perception that the United States is again abandoning its principles and produces that reaction of betrayal. And any use of military force needs to be understood and viewed as being very costly. Any military presence in the region is costly. It doesn't mean this isn't the only thing that's going to drive policy, but it needs to be understood that it elicits this image of the U.S. as having a gun to their head and trying to impose on them the secular model that drives them closer to the Islamic side of the equation and knocks out of balance what is a process of integrating these forces of liberalism and Islamism, and they understand that this is a problem, and there are a lot of thoughtful people who are working on it, and the Muslim Brotherhood understands it and is trying in some way to create that integrative process, and the U.S. needs to in some way understand that it needs to align itself with that rather than to choose one side over the other. Thanks.